Government Surveillance, a Global Threat Against Privacy. Presentation by Miguel y Recio, CGS 3095, RVC Section, Florida International University, spring of 2017. Abstract. This presentation will provide an overview of the existing global threats to privacy and data posed by pervasive government surveillance. A global analysis and ethical analysis of these issues will also be conducted. Introduction. In the current technological age, privacy is under attack from a variety of sources. Government surveillance systems have become commonplace globally and gather enormous amounts of data, both legally and illegally. Government agencies frequently misuse, mishandle, and improperly secure information about people that should remain private. In order to increase awareness of the potential problems these threats represent to the individual, the global and ethical ramifications of these issues will be examined. Threats to privacy from government surveillance. All forms of online government surveillance have dramatically increased in the past 15 years. This represents a major threat against the privacy rights of individuals in today's society. Every form of telecommunication at home or abroad is currently being monitored by government agencies. These include the NSA, the DHS, the CIA and the FBI in the US, the GHQ in the UK, the FSB in Russia, the MSS and PSB in China. Massive spying operations are legally approved of by the state, or at least borderline constitutional in most of these countries. The full extent of the investigation and the surveillance is completely unknown for the most part to the regular public, but it has a huge impact on privacy rights. It is being justified as necessary for national security. Governments collect excessive data related to intelligence purposes, but quite often cross the line into gathering data that is not related to these intelligence gathering efforts at all. As a result, the violation of privacy rights is a common outcome of these practices. The data gathering espionage evolves into a tool for totalitarian control quite often, and this is the case for many states like China, for example. Also Cuba and North Korea. Totalitarian states where every form of communication is monitored and privacy is non-existent and not protected as a constitutional right. Yes, the most prominent scandal revealing details about how invasive government surveillance is towards privacy rights has been the case associated with Edward Snowden in 2013. Snowden was a whistleblower contractor that worked for the NSA that revealed details about a secret surveillance program called PRISM that was being used by the NSA and the GHQ from the UK to spy on citizens globally. The program, government surveillance, had access to data from most major corporations such as Apple, Google, Facebook, Twitter, etc. The government was entitled to access to all of these data without legal costs, and it could also access phone records, text messages, and emails from all major internet and phone providers in the US. Basically, what this means for the customer and the individual is that data mined for commercial purposes was turned into data collected by government for surveillance purposes. Individual digital records and the digital footprint left by users of social media and all telecommunication services was being shared legally, and companies were granted immunity from prosecution for sharing private user data with the government. Another example of government surveillance is provided by the Chinese government. The Chinese government enforces domestic and foreign telecommunication companies operating in mainland China to share data with the government and provide assistance with decryption and encryption of data, basically under the pretense of assisting and in probes and investigations for terrorist activities. All these efforts of gathering data and all the data that gets compiled by government agencies also represents a major risk of privacy for the individuals. There is almost complete lack of visible regulation on how the government will store the data, how it might use it, for how long will it keep it, or how secure it is kept from other espionage services, hackers, and criminals. Regardless of the legality or not of its collection, data can and will be stolen by cyber attacks. Analysis. Constructing approaches to government surveillance and how these approaches impact privacy rights can be appreciated throughout the world. In our particular case, we are going to examine the United States versus China and how both political systems of governance determine how privacy is viewed and how each government will approach government surveillance. This is a democratic system with free elections, while China, officially known as the People's Republic of China, is a state governed by the Communist Party of China, a socialist state that openly endorses communism as its official ideology. The U.S. Constitution specifically grants rights to privacy to each individual in the Fourth Amendment and protects these rights specifically through a number of laws and regulations. On the other hand, the Chinese government imposes many restrictions against Chinese citizens, such as heavily controlling their freedoms of speech, press, assembly, religion, and access to internet and social media. This is used short-lived among a number of constraints imposed on rights that most democratic societies take for granted. Only once these political and legal premises have been applied to the framework of government surveillance, the methods used for conducting intelligence gathering operations locally in each country can be properly evaluated. Basically, this debate centers around the democracy of one system versus the totalitarianism of another. In the U.S., government surveillance is mostly carried out in secrecy. The details of how far or how deep government surveillance goes are not public knowledge. It is legally supported, though. There are acts passed by Congress, such as the Patriot Act or the USA Freedom Act, which endorse and support due legal process for most of the surveillance. It is that language and loopholes are common, and these are usually exploited by government agencies to get away with a lot of excessive surveillance. Nominally, corporations are also required to safeguard data and disclose possible uses to the individual. In contrast, in China, open surveillance by the government is explicitly expected by every citizen. No privacy rights are effectively granted by the state. Private companies, both national and foreign, are required by law to share information with the Chinese government, and the use of backdoors and monitoring of all forms of communication, it's commonplace. Analysis. In ethics theory, a right is sometimes defined as a justified claim granted to the individual by society. The justifications of this claim can be based on legal or moral reasons. Privacy as a right plays an important role in computer ethics. Rights are not the unique consideration to be taken into account in ethical dilemmas, though. In non-democratic societies, utilitarian principles take over as a justification, even though there are questionable ethics, because the denial of privacy rights is based on supposedly the utilitarian principle of the greater good of the society in general. We contrast the U.S. versus China. In the U.S. Constitution, privacy rights are granted. The U.S. government is morally and legally responsible for upholding privacy rights. There is a need to balance national security needs versus privacy, but the accumulation of power and information is definitely a totalitarian practice inconsistent with democratic ideals and governance. Extreme can be appreciated in China, which is almost the complete opposite of the U.S. Totalitarian rule, absolute control over citizen rights, no constitutional or practical protection of most rights, censorship and regulations, and the institutionalized surveillance are used commonplace for China. And all is done in the name of the government knowing what is best for the people. As conclusions, we can determine that government surveillance represents a major threat against privacy in the information age. Unless properly regulated, excessive surveillance will eventually make the concept of privacy disappear. It is a global problem influenced by dissimilar political systems, and as an ethical dilemma, it presents us with the alternative of privacy being a protected right versus no privacy at all in non-democratic states. As reference, we have included a